Hello and a very warm welcome to Sarhad Ke Us Par program. Today we have Dr. Tariq Rahman joining us from Pakistan. Dr. Rahman is a scholar, a columnist, and an author. Most of Dr. Rahman's work is in the field of linguistics. Dr. Rahman was awarded Pride of Performance in 2004 by the Pakistani government. In 2014, Dr. Rahman was awarded Sitara-e-Imtiaz, one of the three highest civilian awards in Pakistan. In 2013, Dr. Rahman was awarded by the government of Bangladesh for his work mainly on capturing the stories of the 1971 war. Dr. Rahman, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much indeed.
In your article in Express Tribune in 2013, you mentioned that had the Pakistani-Bangladesh war not happened in 1971, you would have loved to continue in the army, and that would have been your career for the rest of your life. So please talk us a little bit about what went in 1971 that changed your perception about doing something else.
The place where I lived in the Pakistan Military Academy itself. My father was a civilian officer in structural mathematics who retired as head of the mathematics department. And I studied in Burnham. So the only respectable profession with conveniences as far as I could see, which was nearest to me, was an officer's life in the army. So I took my commission. That is why I joined the army. I took my commission in the Armored Corps. I wouldn't even have thought of any other profession, although I was fond of literature and history, etc. But still, I wouldn't have thought of any other profession had the 1971 war not taken place. And since I heard about atrocities, etc., over there, I'd heard, of course, of Bengali, excesses, let's say, against West Pakistani families and Biharis, and then, of course, the military action, and then that continued for nearly 9 months from the army towards them, etc. So I decided not to stay in the army for reasons of conscience, and left in 8.5 years. I resigned my commission in 8.5 years. So that's the story.
May I please ask you, what were the reasons behind the 1971 situation that developed between the East and the West Pakistan? Please talk us through a little bit about the background of that entire episode, how it unfolded, and the main reasons behind it.
Yes. The Bengalis were at the forefront of the Pakistan movement. And for Bengalis and the Muslim minority in UP, these were at the forefront of the movement. However, after 1947, they started feeling that instead of the masters being British, the new masters were West Pakistanis. And people have written about reasons. I too have in my book called Language and Politics in Pakistan, about how Jute paid for development in West Pakistan, about how a large part of the budget in those days, early days, was spent on the military budget, and so the money came from there. How officers of the civil service in the army, etc., were posted there. All this is true. So it was for the Bengalis, it was like internal colonialism. But something which most people have not written about is that actually what they resented most was what I would call metaphorically the wounds to the heart. That is, they were looked down upon. They were called Kala. They were called Chota. They were called bingo. And when you despise people, when you look down upon them, even if it's a joke, they don't like it. That is what created this intense resentment. And I have actually, I have not publish this, but this has been my feeling of reading throughout, that when we explain through rational reasons only, instrumental reasons, it is not enough. These are these extra rational, emotional reasons for the reaction. And all the evidence I have, incidentally, or most of it, comes from West Pakistanis themselves. They've written about it. Some of it, of course, comes from Bangladesh, but most of it comes from West Pakistanis. So there was this looking down upon them. So those were the reasons. Ethnicity is something which, what happens is people don't want to be dominated. This one solution to that is partition. Let's get away from them. The other one is accommodation. A third one could be that you make specially sure that the minority which is saying that gets special privileges. Now, the third one happened in Canada, for instance. The Francophones, they gave them special favors. It happened in Belgium. Road signs were in the Flemish language, special favors, and so on and so forth. It sometimes works. In India, the states were made. Those are called the language-based states. It worked. Kashmir didn't work because that's not language-based, but this worked. A lot of resentment from the south, slowly dissipated, or turned into or became weaker. So these kind of things work.
Sure.
Here, this did not happen, and so and earlier than that in India, partition was, as far as I understand, the only outcome because of this intense resentment which had been created, fear and resentment. In Sri Lanka, also, in my view, and this is a minority view, nobody likes it. Especially my Sri Lankan friends don't like it, and I respect them a lot, but this is my view. My view is that had they, instead of suppressing the Tamils by force, had they carved out a small state for them, it might have been better. But once the state has been carved out, it should be like the European Union, friendship. What happened in Pakistan and India is that friendship did not develop.
How much of a factor was cyclone bola in the month of November 1970 that contributed to the resentment amongst the poor Bengalis? Because that killed nearly 500,000 people, and that by number, it is probably the largest tropical cyclone we've had in this entire region. So if you could please elaborate on that a little bit. From my own readings, it turns out that somehow the Bengalis did not receive the aid from the Pakistani government, and some say that it came, but came a bit late, and that obviously resulted in the elections as well. When the results got out, I think the Awami League won by almost a sweeping majority across the country, and even in the East Pakistan, they had about nearly 160 to 62 seats. How come it is not part of the national discourse of Pakistan?
Cyclone Bola has been written about by many people, including military officers, generals themselves, who have written about it, and historians. But yes, the significance of it, the salience of it, has not been described probably as much as it should be. That is true. Let me, however, add, because I too have, I read all that I could about it. I interviewed people, etc., about it. But my own feeling is that even if there had been no cyclone at all, even then Mujib would have got all the votes, or most of the votes. So it's a precipitating factor. It's something which helped crystallize the feeling against West Pakistan. But even if it had not happened, the level of the resentment had been there since 1947 September. That's the first time when a small formation had been made to preserve the Bengali language, etc. At that time, of course, it was not welcome, but by 1948, it was obvious. So I feel that, yes, it is significant, but no one factor explains what happened. This is something which happened over years, 20 years or so. So the one factor does not explain it. So bola, yes, it is probably very significant, but all the insults and the exploitation of the last 20 years, that is the real cause and not the immediate cause of bola.
I completely agree with you that there were a lot of other factors, starting from the language movement. As soon as the partition happened and Pakistan came into existence, that was probably the first assault on the brotherhood of both the countries.
Yes, yes.
Just moving forward on this issue, and perhaps the last question on this particular issue, sir. I mean, you have spoken about it a lot, you have written about it, and I probably don't know any other person from the Pakistani armed forces whose sympathies lie towards the Bengalis, not their own countrymen in the West Pakistan, as some would say. How is that seen amongst your colleagues, your society, your close friends? How do they view your sympathies towards the Bengalis?
Here, I'm a bit surprised because, I was a young officer when I started saying these things, but most people, except one honorable exception, most people were kind to me. There's just one honorable exception was not kind to me, probably for the best of reasons. He was more nationalistic or whatever. But apart from that, everybody was very kind to me. My own explanation of it is that they took me to be a greenhorn and too much of a bloody fool, so they didn't really bother. Because in everything else, uh, I was like everybody else and fond of horses and this and that, etc. So perhaps the image of a firebrand radical preaching, revolution, etc., that wasn't there. But I did feel it. I mean, it was there. Otherwise, I would not have left that job. I had no security after leaving the army. I did not know that I would study and do pretty well in that. I didn't know all that. So that was there, but it was inside, and I did not act, I think, in such a manner as to convince others that I was something like an activist. What little I wrote short stories, I wrote essays, etc. But till I actually resigned from the army, I kept them to myself. Not because I wanted them to be hidden, because I thought nobody would be interested in them. It was just surprising that Mr. Eric Cyprian, he was editor in the Muslim, he said that I should get them published and he would publish them in Muslim. That surprised me actually. I did not think they were worth publication. But nevertheless, he said so. And when he said so, I agreed. So that is how it happened. It was, which is rather surprising, yes.
How do you see the current India Pakistan relationship? We've had a thaw very, very recently in a form of the ceasefire at the line of control. How do you view these developments?
As far as the ceasefire is concerned, I was very happy to know that this has happened. Every time this kind of thing happens, I feel that this is a step forward. But I am unfortunately convinced that this is bound to change. Basic problems remain the same. So it's good while it lasts, but I'm not convinced that this is going to be a peace, the kind of peace which we want. We can aspire for that peace. We should aspire for that peace. And this is a good confidence building measure. And I hope it goes on. Above all, because, in this firing, villages get killed, etc. So, yes, it should continue. It's a very positive step. But it is not the end which I have in mind. Like Faz said, "Chale chalo ke wo manzil abhi nahi aayi." This is not the objective. The objective is living in peace like the Schneegen states in South Asia, having no borders worth mentioning, and that is the objective I would like in South Asia.
Some would say the only hurdle to your vision is probably from the Pakistani side. What has been the cost of obsession with Kashmir for Pakistan? How do you view? Is there a realization now, or did you see that the fatigue factor has settled in amongst all sorts of reasons that have contributed to the current line of your government on the issue?
Okay, now this is a complex question. You were basically asking the cost of the
Pakistan's obsession with
yes,
Kashmir.
yeah, obsession. You say Pakistan's obsession. May I submit, sir, that this is an obsession of both our uh, countries, Pakistan as well as India. The obsession is with the land, not with the people. Despite all talk about the people, etc., and their rights, the discussion is really with the land and not really with the people. And for this, a little bit of history would be in order. I know the cost. I mean, of course, the cost is very clear to us. First of all the rape and plunder, etc., of those tribesmen, which people in the Pakistan government and officials on leave sent to Kashmir. First cost. Second, all the costs which in the war 1948-49, both Pakistan and India, armies, they created. Third, 1965 war, Pakistan's attempt to take Kashmir by force, which failed. But everybody died, Pakistanis as well as Indians. Then Kargil, again, Pakistan's attempt to take some part by force, which failed. So all this, Pakistan has not been able to achieve what it could have achieved. India has not been able to achieve what it could have. Then look at the suppression by India of the Kashmiris who wanted their voice and their freedom, or at least not the domination. Right from Jagmohan 1989 onwards, etc. Again and again, there have been Kashmiri movements, much like the Intifada of Palestine, and they've always been suppressed by force. This is a cost. Morally, the country comes down. Physically, people get killed, etc. So many reports which I have read on Kashmir, etc. It's very much like the Bangladesh situation. So that is also a cost. And then India, with its tremendous resources and people, has been pulled down because of this stupid war which is going on, which incidentally India began on the Siachen glacier, the world's highest place, etc. Terrible place. Nobody wants to go there, and yet there's a war going on there. Look at this. So the cost is certainly there. But what happened? Well, legally, Pakistan is to blame. The Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir, see, what happened was, and here the British are to blame, no formula, not just the British. The British are to blame, the Congress is to blame, the Muslim League is to blame. Okay, we'll not talk about the leaders only. All three of them did not sit down and give an unambiguous formula as to what the rulers of the states, or what the states are going to do. Yes, it is true that Nehru used to say that the states should consult their people, and it's the people who should decide. He did say this. And it is also true that Jinnah maintained that the rulers should decide. The British did not agreed with both of them and did not agree with any one of them. Okay. So that is why the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir did not accede. He thought he could remain independent or whatever, etc. He could buy time. And the Nizam of Hyderabad did not accede anywhere. He thought he could buy time. And then Nawab of Junagadh acceded to Pakistan. Of all things, I mean, his people were not Muslims mostly, and they were Hindus, and yet he acceded to Pakistan, and Jinnah accepted it. Big mistake. Because I mean, what moral ground is it left then if you accept a state which has a
I'm glad
majority
you
of
said that.
uh,
I'm glad you said that, because that's what I was going to say. That on
yeah,
one hand,
absolutely,
Jinnah accepts the accession
absolutely,
of Junagadh, then he
absolutely,
basically loses any moral right he would have over Kashmir.
absolutely. That's why I'm
So
saying
may,
legally.
may I please ask you a few questions here that have risen from your own arguments here. You've compared the situation of Bangladesh with Kashmir. Do you mind just talking a little bit more in detail about it? Do you see these
Okay,
movements?
I will in good time.
Okay.
Let me just finish this argument as to what both countries lost. After this, when the accession letter, because these people like General Akbar Khan, etc., after the concurrence of the prime minister, they when they left when they called these tribesmen, huge mistakes, blunder. The tribesmen moved on, etc. They carried all this rape and so on and so forth, and robbing, etc. India had to call for aid, for military aid. Military aid was not given till India signed the letter, or not India. The Maharaja would sign a letter of accession. The Maharaja did. The time of it is a bit disputable, but nevertheless he did. And then the Indian forces moved in and contained these, the tribesmen and so on. Two things are forgotten in this. One, that the area which is now called, which is Pakistan administered Kashmir or Azad Kashmir, this was not liberated by tribesmen. I've written papers, read papers, Snedden is one book, and others, etc. This was mostly liberated because they didn't like the Maharaja, they had rebelled against him, etc. And these were the people before these tribesmen came in. So this is genuinely, here are people who want to not to stay with India, and they did not stay with India. As far as the Indian claim that the other Kashmiris did, that is correct. The reason is that Sheikh Abdullah was the leader of the other Kashmiris, Muslims and Hindus both, and Sheikh Abdullah was the undisputed leader. Most popular leader, undisputed one cannot say, but most popular leader on the Kashmir, which then chose to, for various reasons, to became IAK, Indian Administrative Kashmir. So initially, both sides got what seemed to be just. Pakistan, here are people who have liberated the area; they've joined Pakistan. India, because here are people who are with the leader, and he's joined. But Mountbatten had written, subject to the will, accession subject to the will of the people. Nehru agreed with this in the UN, because he went to complain to the UN, he agreed with this. Sheikh Abdullah, after some time, rebelled against Nehru in many ways because he said autonomy is being taken away, etc. And then there was this people's movement. Slowly, by 1989, in 1965, there was no real people's movement. That's why Pakistan had no case in 1965. But in 1989, there was a people's movement. Pakistan took advantage of it, went into proxy war, sent all these, these fighters who then killed Shias in Pakistan also. All that happened. But there was actually a people's movement. That there was, Pakistan or no Pakistan, that certainly was there. And in many ways, this continues till today. That is where India lost the moral right. I'm not talking about the legal right, I'm talking now about the moral right. India no longer has the moral right to rule over Kashmiris, not Kashmir, Kashmiris in the valley, not in Jammu. There they have a moral right. Not in Kargil area, etc. There they have a moral right. But in the valley, they don't have a moral right. Pakistan doesn't have any right there too. The people of the valley have the right to choose, and they have not been. Actually, nobody has really wants them to choose. What they really want is that they should either join Pakistan or India. What I would like is that these people should choose, not according to what the UN says, but according to what they say, whether they want to be independent, whether they want to, the valley, whether they want to be with India or they want to be with Pakistan. My personal belief is that many of them will probably go for independence, but that one doesn't know. So that is my feeling. You asked whether the Bangladesh thing applies to India. Yes, it does. The scale was much more in Bangladesh. I mean, it lasted such a long time and a huge population, etc. But even if it's a small population and something lasts for 19 years or so, human misery is terrible. I go for human misery, whether it is in Xinjiang, and the Chinese are doing it, they are Pakistan's friends, but for me, humanity matters. Whether they are, Buddhists in living in Tibet, etc., they are suppressed, for me, this matters. Or whether they are in Chechnya and the Russians are suppressing them, for me, that matters. Or whether they are some other minority or whatever. For me, only that matters. No nationalism, nothing else, just this. So, from this point of view, I say that India also does not have the moral right. And the legal right also it does not have. Reason why? Because the legal right reason says that subject to the will of the people. And I have read letters by Nehru to Sheikh Abdullah saying that this is this plebiscite is an academic matter. He is not sincere of it. And this letter dates with 1952. So he wasn't very sincere about it either. As all politicians, most politicians are not. Not blaming Nehru particularly. Nobody was sincere actually.
Dr. Rahman, you've talked about a lot of things. You've spoken about human rights. You've spoken about how uh, the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, acceded to India. And you've given an account of the Pakistani version, I would say, in some instances, the Pakistani version of the history. When you say that, there was a rebellion against the Maharaja, that would be challenged by a lot of people from Kashmir. I'm not talking about the ones from our side, but I'm talking about the people who are living in the so called Azad Kashmir. You spoke about the similarities between what happened in Bangladesh and in Kashmir. Sir, may I please remind you? I think this is perhaps something that's missing from the Pakistani narrative. Is that in 1989, uh, a lot of things happened. I would blame India for meddling into the elections in Jammu and Kashmir to an extent, and that might have been one of the reasons for an uprising in the state. But let's
Yeah.
face it, the Soviet jihad was over, and Pakistan wanted those jihadis to get into India, cause some sort of disturbance over there. And the first thing the jihadis did was they expelled nearly 500,000 Kashmiri Pandits. And how come that's not part of the national discourse in Pakistan?
Okay. First of all, what the versions which I give you are not of the Pakistani state, and they are not the usual narrative in Pakistan. I have deviated from it in many ways. For instance, here, what is said is that the tribesmen went of their own accord because they were Muslims and they were bothered by what was happening and because of the Maharaja's atrocities in different areas, Baramulla and so on. I don't agree with that. I have read accounts, I have read papers, so I know that this is false. Okay,
Absolutely.
and Akbar Khan's book, that is one.
Yeah. Raiders of
Secondly,
Kashmir.
In Pakistan, the narrative is not that it was not Pakistan's legal right at all. Pakistan had no legal right over Kashmir. I say that did not have a legal right.
Does
Yes, I also
Pakistan
say
have
that
a
India
legal
does
right
not.
now?
No,
Okay.
nobody has a legal right now. I mean, that is the other thing where I go against, of course, the Indian perspective is that I say now India does not have a legal or a moral right, especially a moral right.
Sir, may I,
So
may
that's
I
where I
please
go.
make a quick point here? India, okay, some would say that, okay, the instrument of accession is a false document. Whether the document is a false document or truth, that is something for the world to decide. And I think the world is very much clear on that. What sort of document Pakistan has on it? You might call, please, okay,
I have never said that that is a false document.
okay,
I've never said that. That is why I say that at that time, because Sheikh Abdullah wanted to, join the IAK, Indian Administered Kashmir, was legally correct.
okay,
The difference only is that I believe that the area which is under which is now called Azad Kashmir, Pakistani administered Kashmir, this was not under, this was not even following Sheikh Abdullah. They were following the Muslim conference. They took their freedom from the Maharaja because of their own effort. To this India had no right. To this, of course, the Kashmiris had a right and they joined Pakistan. This is the difference. And you say that this is, their people will dispute it. Of course, they have got the right to do it. But a number of people, Snedden, for instance, has a book on that, a whole book. And then I have asked and interviewed people who fought in this war. Actually, I personally haven't. Anam Zakaria has, etc., who fought in this, and British officers, Major John Brown, who have written about it, etc. He was of the Scouts, and so there is ample evidence of this. So if they want to dispute with me, they are better scholars, perhaps they can do so. But my version is different from both India and Pakistan.
Okay.
As far as the documents, I have never disputed.
Let's quickly talk about the Kashmiri Pandits, and then let's just.
Oh yes, Kashmir Pandits. Oh my God! I mean, Kashmir Pandits. When this happened, I read a book, by Pandita. She has described it in full detail. Now the name of the book slips my mind. It was a harrowing tale. It was terrible. And yes, the Haji, that's one reason why I condemn that. The Hajis did that. And they also threw acids on girls' faces, etc. So yes, they brought that. So when one condemns this kind of thing, that does not mean one condemns the rest of the movement also. So of course I condemn it. Basically anything which goes against human beings as human beings, I condemn. So this throwing out of Kashmiri Pandits was a terrible thing. They had been there since centuries. I mean, they were probably Aboriginal over there. I don't know about that, but this was, I condemned it. I condemned it when I read this book, and I condemn it today. Of course, this was terrible. Of course, it's not to be excused. However, the movement later on is not because of of these people who did such things, of only Pakistan-inspired people. The movement, anti-India, is an indigenous movement. It should not be ignored. They are less in numbers, so they have been suppressed. But I hope this does not happen. But it does happen that there is a movement, and people from.
So what sort of a movement is it? What sort of a movement is it if all they want is women to wear burqas, people to only accept one religion? They don't accept any sort of cultural diversity. If anything, they are completely against it. Sayyid Ali Gilani, who once headed the Hurriyat conference, has time and again said that our relationship with Pakistan is on the basis of religion. On one hand, sir, you yourself have said that we did a lot of wrong things with the poor Bengali cousins in the way we treated them, and surely there are enough people in Pakistan, people like you who are well educated, well read, well traveled, who believe that a nation can be formed on so many other factors, including your same language, your culture, your shared history, shared past, but definitely not a shared religion.
Okay.
So if somebody's movement is purely based on religion, how can we call it freedom movement?
Look, in any kind of movements, certain elements do come in which are perhaps not welcome in certain ways. Personally, I feel that a movement based on religion, see, JKLF did not want a movement based only on religion. So
they started off with that.
JKLF
was not a secular party right from day one.
But JKLF did not emphasize this jihadi element. This happened to be emphasized later by you rightly say, by the jihadis crossing over from here. So JKLF was an indigenous movement, or do you deny that JKLF was not also indigenous?
Well,
JKLF was not even helped by Pakistan. General Durrani has written about it that JKLF was not even helped by Pakistan.
Well, it was
So
certainly supported by Pakistan. Many would say that. Anyway,
JKLF
let's.
was not.
Mhm.
Actually, I wouldn't know more than General Durrani does. But what General Durrani says is that he was DGI and they did not help JKLF. Okay, so JKLF was one element which was, I mean, one of the several elements which, in my view, were not Islamic, yes, but jihadi, no. Okay,
So, how do
personally,
you
I would
differentiate
like
between an Islamic and a jihadi?
tremendous difference. Islamic, one can worship the way one wants, etc. One can relate to God the way one wants, etc. Jihadi would mean that one believes in violence to
Can
achieve
you
certain.
can you name any Islamic movements in the recent history that you are alluding towards?
Which are not jihadi.
Yeah, uh,
The Pakistan
purely
movement
Islamic
itself was
movement.
not a jihadi movement.
Sorry, which one?
The Pakistan movement itself was not a jihadi movement.
I'm talking
And
about recent history. Let's talk about the last 20, 30 years.
recent history has mostly been, I mean, then you would go to Afghanistan and you would go to Hamas, etc. Yes, these have mostly been, the jihadi element is more prominent in this, that is true. But there have been, I mean, there have been movements without the jihadi element, that is true
But let's
also.
talk about, I mean, since this Kashmir freedom struggle that the Pakistanis talk about, it happened after the Soviet jihad. Had it happened, say, 50 years prior to that, surely there was an element of, say, Islamic movement when the state of Pakistan was carved out of India, but not in recent history. Recent
Okay,
history
agreed
is
with that.
more
Not in
about
recent history.
Islamic
Agreed.
fundamentalism. The
Agreed.
jihadi
Okay.
forces have
Yes,
been
this
fighting
is
all
this
over the
is
world.
this yeah, this is more the fashion these days, true. But theoretically, there can be, and there have been. But yes, if you are saying in the last 30 years, that is true. Okay. Personally, I would feel that the movement which for Kashmir, Azadi was one of the slogans, etc. And if Azadi means Azadi for everyone living in Kashmir, including Kashmiri Brahmins. So that would be an inclusive kind of movement, not an exclusive kind of movement.
But that
Personally, I feel
that
that
wasn't the
any
case.
movement,
The movement was purely exclusive, wasn't it?
it became purely exclusive, and that is what I condemned earlier. I don't condemn the movement as such,
So
but I
how can
condemn
you
the
say
exclusive
that the
aspect of it.
that the
But
freedom
you know
movement?
something,
Mhm.
had India not delayed the uh, even now it's going on. Had they sat down and they said, okay, we are going to give you autonomy, freedom, something different from what we have at the moment, determine your will, etc., this element would not have come into it. Pakistan or jihadis themselves simply wouldn't have gone there. So, I mean, in that, not that I don't blame, not that I don't blame Pakistan for it, but I also blame India for it.
Well, of course,
And I
as
blame
I said,
India
India
all the
too has
more
made
because
mistakes
now
in
that the
past.
jihadi element, sir, ek minute, the jihadi element is not going in now, and yet India is not giving any kind of freedom or hope of freedom to the people there. For this, I do blame them.
Well, you can't say that 30 years down the line, India is not giving that freedom. I mean, we recently had the panchayat elections and they went well. The voter turnout was immense. And so,
This is, I'm sorry, this is not a laughing matter,
and
but I'm
then
laughing. The reason
and
is
then
this
we
is
had the
just for,
elections of
this
the
is
district development council. Then we had the elections of the district development council, and most of these
of
political
course, of
parties
course.
that objected to the abrogation of Article 370 actually took part in it.
Okay, okay. Yahya Khan was also trying to give all these kind of tidbits uh, to the Bengalis without actually moving out the forces from there. As long as armies don't move out, as long as you don't say, all right, this is your country, we are leaving, and we actually leave, as long as this doesn't happen, the rest doesn't
Sir,
work.
so when one shouts the slogans that Pakistan se rishta kya, la ilaha illallah, कश्मीरियों से रिश्ता क्या, पाकिस्तान का ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह, पाकिस्तान और कश्मीर का मजहब क्या, ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह. So all these things, they don't talk about an inclusive freedom struggle. It is mainly an exclusive Islamic jihadist sort of freedom struggle.
I fully agree. But it has come to this because at the time when the Kashmiri Brahmins and everybody could have been included in this, that time
So
was
whose
missed. And
responsibility
if
was to include the Kashmiri Brahmins in this struggle?
oh, that could have happened if India had actually Sheikh Abdullah's complaint against Nehru was that Nehru was trying to dilute and boss around. Indira Gandhi then did it, and you yourself mentioned the elections. This has been the Kashmiri story for a long time. Had this not happened, suppose Nehru had said to Sheikh Abdullah and others, "All right, you have your plebiscite now. What do you want? Do you want autonomy, independence? All Kashmiris, Brahmins or whoever in the Vale." As far as the Jammu area was concerned, that obviously would have stayed with
So
India and should.
okay, one final question on this bit, and because we need to move forward
Yeah,
as well. I
when
think
we
we are
move
stuck
forward,
on this particular point.
absolutely.
Who entered first into the Kashmir? Was it the Indian army that entered first, or did the jihadi forces supported by Pakistan came into Kashmir first?
I have answered this question in the beginning. Of
Mhm.
course, the tribesmen entered first.
No, I'm not talking about the 1948 tribesmen. I'm talking about in the late
47.
80s. In the late 80s. So Indian armed forces went into Kashmir after the jihadis took over the Kashmir Valley and they expelled the Kashmiri Pandits. That is when the Indian army entered on the doorsteps of the local Kashmiris. Prior to that, they were confined to the line of control and the international border.
Yes, but that is true. But it shouldn't come to this.
So
There is suppression, and then somebody
rigging,
else enters. For
sir,
instance,
rigging in elections happens all over the place. Still happens in India. It's in some places. Happens in Pakistan most of the time. And back then, when in the early 90s or the late 80s in India, we had the license Raj thing, and states like UP, Bihar, people used to come and loot the entire ballots, and they would take away the papers or expel people and just tell them that, okay, we are going to cast the vote on your behalf. So these sort of things were not new to India at the time, but that does not mean that you launch a movement in the name of Islam and then expect that the Indian armed forces are not going to retaliate. Anyways, let's move forward, sir, a little bit. I think we need to cover a lot of questions, and we are running out of time.
just one word before it.
Sure.
Yes, election frauds and other things do take place, but the resentment in the Kashmir Valley, indigenous resentment before even the going of the jihadis, was festering since 1951 onwards. I will say no more. You can contradict me, others can
No, I
contradict
mean
me.
you
Let's
you
move.
are entitled to your opinion, and I certainly respect that.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Saharan.
let's move forward, sir. So has Pakistan realized that the geopolitical boundaries of Kashmir cannot be changed by using force or proxy war? Is it even practical to talk about Kashmir?
I hope they have. And if they haven't, I would be sorry, because I feel that all the wars, 1965 war and the Kargil, etc., have cost in human beings and in wealth far more than any country should take. So I hope that does not happen. When I say things like this, I don't mean war. I mean peace, actually. And so if they haven't, I think to some extent there has been a change. For instance, for a long time, there hasn't been so much jingoistic talk about, jihad, etc. So, and then this fighting, which you mentioned in the beginning, that has stopped, etc., on both sides. So there hasn't been any attack also for some time. So I hope that this has happened. And of course, official policy has never said that they are doing it. Official policy is that we are only standing for the rights of the Kashmiri people. But I hope that this is what real policy also becomes. And when one stands for the rights of the Kashmiri people, one stands for the rights of all oppressed people everywhere. No, not just the Kashmiri people, but all oppressed in principle. So that would mean, of course, Palestine, and that would mean so many other places.
Pakistan often talks about the right to self determination for the Kashmiri people, and at the same time, they shout slogans in the parliament that Kashmir banega Pakistan. Don't you feel that there's a huge contradiction in these two statements? Because when we talk about right of self determination, then we should be open to all options, including the independent Kashmir option. Now, surely that is not something that India's position is. How do you see that, these two different statements, the right to self determination versus the Kashmir banega Pakistan?
Okay, I said in the right in the beginning that the obsession is, and I said for both countries, the obsession is with the state and not with the country and not with the people, with the land and not with the people. So this is contradiction. But Pakistan, the slogan which you raised is mostly raised in the what is called the Azad Kashmir Assembly. It is contradiction. Of
No,
course, it is contradiction.
it has time and again, it
Yes,
has been raised in the
that's
parliament
fair
in
too.
Islamabad as well.
Yes, agreed. So there is contradiction in this. There's obvious contradiction in this. I mean, what the real meaning is that while we are saying this, United Nations and all that, what we really want is that you join Pakistan. Of course, there is contradiction in this, but not in the way I feel. In the way I personally feel is that yes, the Kashmiri people and the Kashmiri people alone, whether they want to stay with India or with Pakistan or with nobody on their own. My personal position is this. This is not the position of the Pakistan government. So yes, there is contradiction in this. Yes, it is wrong. And yet, and this is what it hides the real intent. And the real intent is that, we talk about the Kashmiri people is talk. And the idea is that they should join Pakistan. I feel people should remain where they want to, how they want to, should rule themselves as they want to.
Sure. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that the political slogans being raised in Kashmir are very much pro-Islam and pro-Pakistan, and the only basis for their freedom struggle, they think, and they echo as most of the time, is purely on the basis of the religion. So, here is my question, sir. And you talked about the inclusiveness, which includes the Hindus, the Sikhs, the Buddhists who live in the state. So
Yeah,
now that you've advocated for that, can Pakistan go back to the drawing board and re-examine the Nazariya of Pakistan, which is the two-nation theory? The world we live in today has changed a lot. Where exactly do Pakistanis find themselves with the two-nation theory now?
in this too, my view is different from others.
Mhm.
My view is that people resort to the difference, whatever the difference among people is, language or experience or religion or etc. It becomes prominent because of certain political or economic reasons. Now, if those reasons are resolved, people can live together peacefully. When in 1947, Jinnah advised Indian Muslims to live like good Indians and to learn Hindi and so on. He wanted them, the two nation theory had been abandoned by him in his 11th August speech, in which he said, you're free to go to your temples, to your mosques, etc., etc. He also said that Pakistanis, Hindus, and Christians, and Sikhs, and Parsis, etc., are all Pakistani citizens. So the two nation theory was a strategy, a political strategy of that required for that period in order to secure the maximum security for Muslims within India or outside, and it so happened outside. It is not a permanent feature. It is not something which is written in stone. It's not something which lasts forever. The two-nation theory again came up, and rightly so, during the Bengali West Pakistani conflict, because once again the situation was that the Bengalis felt that there was actually internal colonialism. So this time again there was a two-nation theory: the Bengalis and the non-Bengalis, the West Pakistani. Again, rightly so. This time the partition was not peaceful, unfortunately, and the wounds linger because we haven't had a Truth and Reconciliation committee even now, unlike South Africa. Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs, etc., live in Britain. Elsewhere, they don't call themselves two nations there. And when I go to Britain, I've studied there. Some of my best friends were Indians. We were not even bothered who they were, what religion they followed, etc. We just talked because we spoke the same language, we shared the same jokes, we shared the same cuisine, and so on and so forth. Well, they must have thought some of my views as a bit daft, but they didn't say so. So it was fun, and they remain even now. So we have continuities. We should not deny them because we are human beings and we have much more in common than we realize. But at times, differences come up because of which resolutions are sought. One of those resolutions is a peaceful partition. The two-nation theory was I wished it had not continued after that into something hard, written in stone, which should be taught to children as propaganda stuff. That is what happened in our textbooks and elsewhere, etc. It became a propaganda stuff. So that's what my position on the two-nation theory is. Sometimes, yes, it may be useful for a certain specific purpose. At times, it is harmful because then it leads to hatred.
And what purpose would that be?
As I said, the purpose in before 1947 was for a privileged minority. You see, the UP Muslims are privileged actually. A privileged minority afraid that it would be dominated. So that was the purpose in 1947. In Bengal, here was a majority which felt that it is not being given its right, that it's being suppressed. So those are the purposes. In Sri Lanka, where suppression in the end, they were completely suppressed by military action. Here was the Tamil minority,
Sure,
which wanted their own way of life.
What purpose does the two-nation theory serve today? I've seen a lot of Pakistani people talking about it.
Today it does not. Today it creates hatred. Today it should not serve the same purpose which it did a long time back. Today it creates animosity and difference, even when there are similarities and continuities. But yes, I feel that the two-nation theory has unfortunately become a mark of a permanent feature of Pakistani textbooks and propaganda, which I feel is wrong. I also feel, unfortunately, that the two-nation theory is being revived in practice, if not in theory, fully in practice by the Hindutva brigade in India. They are the ones now who actually make the Muslims feel as if they are the other suppressed nation. They are the outcasts. They are the Malich. That is happening in India. So the two-nation theory should be discarded, and we should talk about not being one nation, but being different nations in our own places, like the Germans and the French, like the Swiss and the Austrians.
How can the Muslims of Pakistan object to the Hindu nationalism when their own country has been achieved using the same measure?
See, logically, they shouldn't. Logically, what Pakistan, since Ziaul Haq's days, especially and earlier than that, there is more and more reference to Islam, etc., which has had a bad effect on the minorities living in Pakistan. They've been suppressed much more since that time. But if Pakistan does something wrong, does it mean India should also do it? It does not justify if India, two wrongs don't make a right. So while I condemn this happening here, I condemn the same now happening in India.
Well, that's a very fair argument from your end. May I please
Thank
ask
you.
you? May I please ask you on the situation with the Pakistani minorities? Do you believe that they are considered as equal citizens of the state? Because I can speak for the Indian Muslims, they are certainly considered as an equal citizen of the Indian state.
Legally speaking, there are certain, let's say, certain positions which are only for Muslims, such as the President of Pakistan can only be a Muslim and are 40 years of age. So legally, not everything is kosher. That is true. Now we come to the actual position, not the
Okay.
legal position, but the actual position. The actual position is that the minorities are having a very rough time in Pakistan. Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, Hindu girls have been kidnapped, married by force. There are Human Rights Commission of Pakistan has written about it in great detail. Ayya Rahman Saab, who has died recently, and I wrote about his death. He was a very great man. He has written about it. So many people. So there are people who have pointed this out in detail. I've also written a small article, but that doesn't matter so much. Other people have actually written much more. Christians, a bishop burnt himself because he thought that by doing so, people will be so jolted that the Christian young people, because of land disputes, etc., would be accused of sacrilege and so on. So, of course, this is pretty bad. And Sikhs are in a slightly better position. But Parsis have moved away from Pakistan. The last Jew left quite some time back, and so it's a pretty bad scenario. And I also know that several people in Pakistan deny it, which is wrong. I also know that several people in Pakistan, like myself and Ayya Rahman and others, Ayya Rahman is exalted, I can't be in his company, but several people have actually raised their voice for it and have written about it also. I also know that in India, there are many people who have come to the aid of Muslims who were persecuted there, and Christians who were persecuted there. After the Gujarat riots, there is an Indian intellectual, forgotten his full name, but Bandar was the last part of his name. He came to Pakistan. He gave an excellent presentation on what his NGO, etc., had done to help Muslims there. So in India too, that thing is happening. There are good people who do these kind of things.
Well,
So, but in India too, minorities since the last at least 6 years have been persecuted pretty badly. People have been beaten up because they were carrying beef for something. People have been intimidated, burnt. All this is happening in India too. So actually, if we are both going down a bad direction, we should both get down and condemn it. You
are
condemn
we trying to
India, I
create
condemn
an
Pakistan. We both condemn both India and Pakistan if we are doing this.
sure?
And we also condemn the United States for murders like Floyd. I mean, elsewhere, forget about belongs to where, forget about nationality, etc. Just be human.
Every Pakistani loves to talk about what happened in Gujarat. Sir, may I please ask you, do you know a little bit about what caused the Gujarat riots? What were the events
Yes,
that led to that massacre of and both Hindus and Muslims?
yes, it's very terrible to say this. Their Hindu pilgrims coming from somewhere were burnt in their carriage by Muslim goons. This is what happened. It is terrible. It
Now,
is.
what do you expect? What do you expect that from the Indian state today? And what can they do to mainstream the Indian Muslims? One of the things that have been mentioned by the Prime Minister is that the Indian Muslims should accept the Uniform Civil Code. It's been long, nearly 73 years. How come the Muslims of India are not willing to accept the Uniform Civil Code? They want to continue with the Muslim Personal Law Board, or some would say the Sharia rules.
I feel that a state should care for diversity to the extent that it should not insist upon a common code. Now, this is for Pakistan, India, United States, England, anywhere. So I believe that one should not expect a nation. The whole concept of a nation, something which we borrowed from Europe, is based upon uniformity.
Mhm.
Human beings are not uniform. So to impose a one single national language, which last time
Language
in
is
my
a different
interview I
thing,
said,
but as far as the law goes, it should be applied on the citizens equally. Do you believe that citizens should have separate set of laws?
yes, citizens should have separate sets of laws and certain things. Yes, there are certain laws like murder and rape and so on and so forth. Yes, the criminal law and certain things. Yes, that should be common, and one should be just in applying that. But otherwise, yes, laws should not be the same, and we should not expect Indian Pakistani Hindus to follow the laws which Pakistani Muslims do. We should give them, as far as possible, the right to for self-fulfillment as a community and growth, and the same should happen in India. So I don't accept the idea that there should be same laws applied to everywhere.
Well,
And
the
by the way,
criminal
this
laws, the
India,
criminal laws are same,
just
more or
one
less
moment,
the same.
Sansa.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm saying it now, but this is something which I've written about much earlier, something like 20 years earlier, about the possibility of changing laws in European countries. You know that
So if a Muslim man wants to keep four wives, it's absolutely fine.
if a Muslim, okay, look, if the women are willing and the man is willing and there is no coercion of any kind, then perhaps it is fine. And that is why I told you that when I was writing this thing 20 years back, it was about the Mormons. I was talking about the Mormons and Muslims in the United States. I didn't have India and Pakistan in mind. But I said that, communities must be respected. And you cannot have communities are diverse. One must respect diversity to the extent of as much as possible, but there are certain uniformities, like in murder, etc., as I said. But yes, the rest one should not
So if the
insist upon.
if there is any community, okay, for instance, I live in New Zealand. Tomorrow, if the Muslims of New Zealand decide that, oh well, we need to be governed by the Sharia law, and if not for the criminal part, at least as far as the civil code goes, do you think that is something that should be easily acceptable to the New Zealand government and the people?
This is you're asking me a question which
I'm,
which
I'm,
leaves
I'm just trying
me.
to put things into a different perspective, not just purely from the Indian perspective.
See,
So the same thing is, well, there's a debate going on in Canada at the moment, and almost the entire Muslim population over there advocates for themselves to be governed through the Sharia law. So is this something that the Canadians should also give up on and grant them the
you see,
Sharia law?
I have not looked at these movements very closely, but I have followed some of it in schooling in Britain. My feeling is that these are some articulate, strong men, and generally these are led by clerics, and this is not the voice of the people. If you talk to young women, they're against it because they feel that such laws are going to hurt them. So this is to be taken with more than a pinch of salt. One should be very, very clear as to what other freedoms and laws it violates, and whether the people, so to speak, that is ordinary people, which means women, and men both, ordinary men and women, and not clerics and not the leaders who speak persuasively and whose voice is heard. I feel that they can take everybody for a ride. So
As far as
these,
the
I feel,
Muslim communities are concerned, or the Muslim countries, it is the voice of the cleric that is far more bigger than the common people.
so there. That is why I say that in this case, yes, there should be caution. There should be caution. One cannot accept the voice of some dominant clerics alone,
I'll tell you what the problem
especially.
is, sir. I've done my schooling in India. The main problem is that the clerics don't like when the Muslims try and mingle with the non-Muslims, or for that matter, when they are sent to have their education with the non-Muslim kids. They would say, "Oh well, it's forbidden. This sort of education is forbidden. You can't do, anything good with it. You this is going to take you away from the fold of the religion." And they try and suppress each and everything that unites the people. So that's where the problem lies. Most of the Muslims these days, they don't study in the madrasas. Those who are a little bit, I would say, affluent, those who have some means, they would send their kids for the private education in schools that teaches the uniform education system and all those kind of things. But the problem is when the society wants to completely cut itself from the mainstream. So how do you view these things needs to be tackled? So if the Indian Prime Minister says that they need to accept, the Muslims of India need to accept the uniform civil code, I think he has a valid point.
You have raised two issues in this. One full of hope. I also thought, and you now said it, that the ordinary Muslims raise their children and want their children to be educated in secular kind of institutions. They want them to study English. They want them to get on with their lives. That's where the hope lies.
Mhm.
And such kind of people are many. So yes, it is fine that in this case the clerics should be given as little voice and as little power as possible. The other point you raised was that about the Indian Prime Minister. You have your point, and I agree to disagree with you. But the Indian Prime Minister is then jumping on to a similar code for all. He's not talking about this. That is a big jump. I feel that in what the Indian Prime Minister is suggests now, Mr. Modi, is actually a violation of the rights of Muslims of India. Whereas there is hope for similar dreams, similar possibilities, similar potential, affection, amiability between Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, etc., in India and Parsis in India, if education, secular combined education carries on. While I would welcome this, I would say that one needs to rethink about the kind of at least legal uniformity which is being sought. For this, one would need to, I think, one would need to rethink. See, the main point
Sure.
is try to do as much as possible to hurt people as less as possible. That's it.
Well, the government certainly doesn't see that they're going to hurt the Muslim community by
Or
the
the
by their
government
actions.
perhaps doesn't know that. The government might actually think this is going to be good.
Okay, let's
But I
let
feel
me
that
let me
one
just
should
put
look
it
at the
in the
pulse
other
on
way
the
around.
ground and
Mhm.
then make laws
Okay,
or
so a
implement.
couple of years ago, the Indian government came with the Citizenship Amendment Act, and they said that we would speeden up the citizenships for the non-Muslims living in Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Afghanistan if they want to move to India. And the Muslims were excluded out of that option. Not that the Muslims can't apply; they can, but their application would fall into the old criteria, which takes about 12 years of time. So the main reason for the protests that were led by the Muslim community at that point in time was that how can a secular state differentiate between its people on the basis of religion? So there, I think that argument is very fair. But when the state says that everybody needs to have the same set of civic laws, then one particular community, which in this case are the Muslims, they can say, well, we are Muslims. How can we be equal like the rest? So you can't have both ways.
Agreed. Although this is very, actually, legally it became a big issue, but actually it was a very minor point. I mean, as you yourself say, that the number of Muslims actually migrating to India would perhaps be less. There was this, you see, the reason why the Indian government might have thought that maybe there may be more Muslims coming in would be that Rohingya Muslims might come through Assam, etc. So there might be those reasons, not from Pakistan but from Assam. So that those reasons could be there. But these are really, yes, I agree. The contradiction is there. But
A huge one indeed. Not a minor contradiction, but a huge
yeah,
one. On one hand, they want all religions to be equal, and they want the government not to differentiate when it comes to the citizenship law. But at the same time, they don't want themselves to be treated
okay,
with the same set of law when it comes to the civic code. I've
okay,
got a couple
okay.
of more questions, sir. Why is the worldview of a Pakistani so different from the rest of the world? And I'll give you a couple of examples. Majority of Pakistanis believe that Malala Yousafzai faked her injury, whereas the world believes that she was shot at. And the poor girl, she went through a lot of trauma and the healing process. The second one being that 9/11 was an inside job. Now some would say that, okay, there are many in the west who believe that 9/11 was an inside job, but certainly with the case of Osama bin Laden, most of the Pakistanis believe that he wasn't even living in Abbottabad. Now the world thinks that he was caught over there, he was killed in an action over there. So my point is that how come the Pakistanis have such a different worldview from the rest?
Um, well, you're asking someone who has actually been lamenting about it for a long time. There are several reasons to blame for this. One was that the textbooks and the normal propagandas, at least since General Ziaul-Haq's time, was that the young people created in their minds what may be called a kind of political Islam. Does not mean that you are, more morally inclined towards people, more gentle, more soft towards people, etc. Not those aspects of any religion, not those aspects of Islam, but a political Islam, which meant that you created an image of the world as if the whole world was against you, as if you were besieged. And the West was the besieger with the help of India and Israel, which was so far away. But anyway, this mindset of three great powers, this percolated talk, daily conversation. Young people would implicitly believe in this. I mean, they just wouldn't listen. If I were to give a lecture saying that there's absolutely not a shred of evidence of this explosion happening to do anything with Israel, for God's sake. These are certain people who call themselves Taliban and they say they've done it. They wouldn't listen to all this. So that was there. This was the fashion. Unfortunately, very unfortunate, it cost us a lot because here were young soldiers when the army decided to fight them. Here were these young soldiers who were dying over there with the in the border in Fata, fighting with the Taliban. And the other soldiers and others were thinking that the Taliban, were the good Muslims and perhaps the rest of us were not. So it cost us a lot. I mean, look how difficult it must have been for the army in those days to motivate their own young soldiers to keep fighting. So Malala thing was part of this. The Taliban were put somehow into some kind of a sacred pedestal, so they couldn't be wrong, and therefore Malala must be faking. So it is that point of view. And however, let me tell you that these people are articulate. They are on the social media. I'm not on the social media, so I don't know. But my wife tells me they're on the social media, and this is what they write even now. But intelligent young people, I don't believe this. You will say they are very few. That's true. They are very few. But nevertheless, there's not a single point of view in Pakistan or anywhere. There are different points of view, and I cannot say whether this point of view is losing out, permanently. I don't know, but it is certainly there, certainly to be regretted, and it's conspiracy theory of the most dangerous kind because we stand to lose. Yeah.
I've also noticed that the majority of Pakistanis want India to be a secular state, but themselves to remain an Islamic country. I'll give you a very good example, sir, and I have to mention this. I met Javed Jabbar Sahab, a prominent Pakistani politician from the Pakistan People's Party, 2 years ago in Karachi. It was, to be precise, 13th of December 2018. And on the very same day, the assembly election results were out for Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh. In all three states, BJP lost the elections. And Javed Jabbar Sahab asked me, Arvind, BJP has lost the elections. What do you have to say about it? And I said, nothing. And he said, oh, well, aren't you happy about it? I said, well, since you have already expressed your happiness and I am in Karachi, so I can't say that I'm unhappy. Let me also say that I'm also happy about it. But I would certainly like to know the reason of your happiness, sir. And he went on to say that, well, India is a secular country. If it would be great if a party like Congress rules India. And I said, okay, fair point. So are you scared about a particular minority if BJP rules India? And he said, oh, well, I'm concerned about all the minorities of India. I said, let's be a bit honest here, Javed Sahab. Are you concerned about the Muslims? And he said, well, yeah, that's true. I am, and all of us here in Pakistan are concerned about the Muslims. Hence, we would prefer Congress over BJP. Uh, so then I replied that Javed Saab, equally, I'm also concerned about the minorities of Pakistan. Wouldn't it be great if Pakistan too were to be a secular country? To which he immediately replied that no, but we are an Islamic nation. I said, how convenient, Javed Sahab. आपने तो एक सेकंड नहीं लगाया मुझे ये जताने में कि आप एक इस्लामिक मुल्क हैं. So I think it's about time this debate needs to be settled once and for all, that whether secularism is a good thing or bad. If it's good, it can't be good in India and bad in Pakistan. May I please, on that note, may I please ask you one final question, sir? Is poor India-Pakistan relationship a burden that we need to carry for the rest of our lives?
You asked two questions, one about secularism and the other one was. See, my opinion on this is clear. My opinion has always been that it's very similar to Jinnah Saab's own opinion, which is that as far as the state is concerned, the business of the state is concerned, that is people's relationship with the ruler and the ruled, business of the state, etc. One must have a constitution which does not differentiate on the basis of religion. In other words, a secular constitution. Okay? That is, and this is for all countries, including Israel,
Okay.
and India and Pakistan. Okay. Now, why people will not generally say it? I mean, you were in Karachi and you were saying what would be more acceptable in Karachi. People would not say it because now although this is only concerning politics, and Jinnah said it, but somehow in the minds of our people now and our media now, this is heresy. This is something to be blamed. This is something which should not be said, so people are afraid of saying it. Right? There it is, simple answer. But your other question was about the relationship between Pakistan and India. Should it be a burden forever? Certainly not. It is something which can change. It is something which should change. And I believe that the way actually Mr. Kasuri, when he was Minister for Foreign Affairs in Musharraf's government, I mean, ironically enough, Musharraf's government, who was a military ruler, did try to create some kind of advance in Kashmir by opening up the, starting off a bus and opening up some borders, etc. I believe that might be a good beginning. But if you really want to change, one must really, you will not like my saying it, but one must really, Kashmir is not to be treated as one state. Different people over there probably want different things. And the valley is the main problem. I feel one has to ask the people of the valley, Hindus, Muslims, whoever they are, and perhaps with the United Nations doing so, or somebody who can be trusted and who is neutral. I do not know who that is, but I think the United Nations might do a good job as to what they want. And if they feel, which I feel they might say, okay, look, we want to have a Switzerland here, we want to be independent of Pakistan, and we want to be independent of India, then we should facilitate that. It's going to be a thorn removed from our sides, all of us, and we're going to live happily after that. Nobody lives happily like a fairy tale, but just one big thorn removed. That
Yes,
is
minimum what you
on
can
which
get,
note I
certainly.
end. We are not, we are, some of us at least are not idiots. And human beings are not bad intrinsically. Human beings are basically good. It's just that propaganda and wars and such things make us do evil things. But we are basically good people. And I think if we go for the goodness in human beings, etc., and if we talk about if we talk and actually practice sincerely a movement towards peace, it is possible. So it's not forever. It's maybe not for our grandchildren.
Fair enough. I would say that Pandit Nehru, in his all sincerity, went to the United Nations for a peaceful solution of Jammu and Kashmir issue, and the United Nations in April 1948 passed the resolution, which is known as the Resolution 47. Had Pakistan somehow, agreed to the terms, which they did initially, but everything was in writing. If that had been put into place, some sort of action would have been taken. Then who knows? We wouldn't be having this debate over Kashmir at all. I
Oh,
would really.
yeah. There are several solutions, Dixon solution and the Chenab formula and so on and so forth. But what has happened in the past, let's forget about that. Let's move forward with
Well,
hope.
the majority of people on both the sides, and even there is a realization in the Pakistani camp as well now, that the solution perhaps lie in the status quo being maintained and relations being restored, and having that people to people connection, trade, and making the maximum usage of the little window that we have between us. Uh,
Sure, sure, sure. Those are confidence building measures. But as I said in earlier, confidence building measures go thus far, but no more. And eventually, what we want is a much more radical solution for peace. I'm not, the interview is at an end, so I'm not going to go into what Mr. Nehru, why he went to the United Nations, but I've got letters saying that he went only to buy time. However, let's forget about why he went there.
I think we need
Let's
to
forget about
appreciate
all
the
that.
man.
Let's just say that we want to move forward.
I think we should appreciate the men, especially after the abrogation of Article 370. For the first time, a sitting prime minister addressing the parliament said that ये गांधी और नेहरू का हिंदुस्तान नहीं है, ये मोदी का हिंदुस्तान है, as if the India of Gandhi and Nehru was far better than the current India. And if it was, what did Pakistan give to Gandhi and Nehru's India other than wars? Well, on that note, I would like to thank you, Dr. Tariq Rahman Sahib. We have disagreed on many issues, but at the same time, there has been a lot of agreement over a lot of issues as well. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. Indus Treaty दी है वैसे. Pakistan gave the Indus Treaty and lots of small things also. Okay then. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
It was very nice being with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.